Okay, class, this is your video for the weekend with relation to types of evidence and the last 6 logical fallacies. Okay, so the first thing, I hope you did your reading before you watch the video, just because the video will make much more sense if you have the reading already done. Okay, so we're going to start with evidence. So now that we've done the idea of a claim, we've turned the claim into a thesis, then we've taken that thesis, and now we have to be able to find evidence of whatever we're using. So this is where the logical fallacies come in. This is where the various types of making sure that you have relevant, sufficient, and accurate evidence to support your claims. Okay, so we have 2 different types of evidence. We have first-hand evidence and we have second-hand evidence. First-hand is the idea that you have experienced it, or someone told you that has experienced it. So it's right within that main circle. So personal experience, the first one, should be quite obvious in the sense of it's something that you personally have experienced. You were there, you can tell people about it. You were riding your bike by it, you were hiking in the mountains with it, you were in the room when it happened. Okay? Anecdote is a little different in the sense of it happened to somebody else, but they're telling you a little story about it. So they're telling you an anecdote, and then you are using that anecdote as evidence. You're using it as someone else's firsthand experience, but because you are the second person to hear it, it's still considered that firsthand evidence because you're using it currently from somebody else right away. It's not something that happened a while ago. It's something in the moment that's going on, that's taking place. So it still makes it firsthand evidence because they directly told you. Okay, the last piece of firsthand evidence we have is a current event. This is what's going on in the news locally, in the States, in the United States, in the world, in the hemisphere, out in space, anything that's currently right now taking place. So any news, this is why we do the current events, because you have to keep up on current events. You have to do these blogs because come the end of the year, the third essay, the argument essay, comes from the current events that have been going on in the last couple of years. So it is very imperative that you pay attention to the news and what's going on both locally and globally. The next one is secondhand evidence. It's not happening directly to you, so you have to do some research with it in order to be able to use the evidence. So the first one we have is historical information. This means that it's in the past. Okay, for me, historical information is going to be different than what your historical information is because I'm vastly older than you are. So I remember 9/11 a lot different than you do. So 9/11 to me was a current event. When it happened, it was a current event because I was there. But to us now, it's historical information. Okay, anything historically that you go through in your history classes and APUSH class, anything before, I would say like 5 years ago, would be historical information. Okay, expert opinion. I think of it as the idea of in a court of law, it's the person that they pay to come in and give the information about the topic. Like I'm an expert in American history and American literature and British literature. Those are my specialties. I am an expert in those areas. Okay, Miss M is an expert in math. Okay, if you are a doctor, you are an expert in your specific line of being a doctor. Same thing as being a lawyer. Same thing as being a geologist or a rocket scientist. You are experts within your field, and you can testify or you can give evidence from your field. Okay. The next one, or the last piece of evidence that we have, is quantitative evidence. So this is the facts, the statistics, the surveys, the polls. It's all of the numbers. This is where the logos usually comes in. If you look at this, you'll notice that within firsthand evidence, the personal and the anecdote, personal experience and anecdote are more of the pathos, but everything else is more like current event, historical, expert, and quantitative are more of the logos. Okay, now looking at these 4 examples, I want you to take a moment, pause your video, write these examples down, and then we're going to go over these in class on Monday. Okay, so write them down, pause for a moment, and then restart. Okay, we have 6 more logical fallacies. So we went through 7 already, and now I'm adding 6 to it. So that will be a total of 13. Okay, when we did the first batch of logical fallacies, I missed one because I was using an old video and didn't realize that equivocation is part of the main set of logical fallacies. So I'm picking it up here in the more logical fallacies section. There are actually only 10 logical fallacies, yes, 7 plus 11 logical fallacies in the textbook, and then there are 2 that are not. But these 2 that are not in the textbook do show up quite often, and I have slides on each of them to explain it to you so that you understand. Okay, so the first one we have is equivocation. This is a fallacy of relevance and the idea of making sure that the information matches where it's supposed to go. So when you equivocate something, it's you're linking something that is, oh, am I about to give the wrong one? Okay, I was about to actually give post hoc. So equivocation is intentionally misleading an audience by using double meanings or ambiguous statements. So it's the idea of equivocating something to something else. So much like the Family Guy meme that I showed you today, the idea that kerosene is fuel, Red Bull is fuel, so kerosene is the idea of making kerosene good for you. So the idea here is that that doesn't work. So that also fits in with that relevancy aspect and that equivocating something to something else that doesn't necessarily match. So it fits in there with that idea. The next one we have is post hoc ergo propter hoc. In Latin, this means after which, therefore, because of which. So this one is the idea of connecting things based on causality. So especially with the idea of historical evidence, you have to make sure that your evidence is correct in leading to your cause. So this is where your cause and effect come in, is did these causes really lead to this effect? So if you're incorrectly linking the causes, I know the evidence, or not the evidence, the example in the book talks about Johnson and the idea that after he became president, all of these hurricanes happened. They don't match. First of all, the topics aren't even relevant. So this would probably go under a fallacy of relevance. So hurricanes and a president don't match. It's the same thing right now. Trump's president, that doesn't mean just because he's president, we're having all of these hurricanes. Okay, so you have to make sure that they match with the idea of the causality and what is taking place. The next one we have is appeal to false authority. This is the idea that someone is speaking on a topic that has no expertise to speak in it. I always like to use the Kobe Bryant example here. Several years ago when he was hired by Turkish Airlines to be their spokesperson and speak out and say, hey, how great they are. But he's a basketball star. He's not a pilot. He's not a stewardess. He doesn't travel to foreign countries all of the time. He doesn't have that basis to be able to say, hey, that Turkish Airlines is the best one to fly on. In fact, he was paid to say it. So in actuality, it doesn't matter if he's done it or not because he was paid to do it. If anything, Kobe Bryant should be a spokesperson for things like Spalding, for Nike, for Adidas. Those match because he has the proper authority to be able to speak on those. The next one we have is bandwagon. Bandwagon is the idea that if someone is doing it, so should you. I think of this as, specifically with teenagers, as the simple task of my friends drive, mom and dad, why can't I drive? Or my friend has it, why can't I have it? The same thing is when celebrities start wearing certain clothes or celebrities start walking a certain way or talking a certain way or doing certain things, people jump on the bandwagon. Same thing when a basketball team starts winning that no one used to follow, people jump on the bandwagon when they start winning. Okay, it's that same idea. You're following it for the wrong reasons. Okay, the next two, slippery slope and guilt by association, like I said, are not in the book. So you might want to write down these definitions and examples as I go through them. The first one we have is slippery slope. You said that if we allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. So this is very similar to the idea of hasty generalization, as in you're jumping to a conclusion. But in this case, when you're jumping to the conclusion, you're choosing not to go through with it at all because of the conclusion that would be jumped to. Okay, so you change your mind because you don't want to be stuck in that generalization. So the example here, Colin Closet asserts that if we allow same-sex couples to marry, then the next thing we know will be allowing people to marry their parents, their cars, and even monkeys. Okay, so it's that generalization and that idea that if we're moving from one to the other, so we shouldn't allow same-sex marriage to happen because that we're jumping to those conclusions. That if we allow that to happen, those last three things will happen. People will marry their parents, their cars, and even monkeys. Okay, so it's that slippery slope. You keep sliding and it keeps going. Okay, but in a slippery slope, unlike a hasty generalization, the slippery slope, you choose not to continue because of that generalization. Okay, the last one we have is guilt by association. This is the idea that something is guilty just because it's associated with something else. So an example here, Hitler was a vegetarian, therefore vegetarianism is wrong. So just because Hitler is a bad guy and just because he chose to be a vegetarian does not mean that vegetarianism is wrong. So it's guilt by association. Just because you're associated with a bad person doesn't mean you're as guilty as they are. Okay? All dogs have 4 legs. My cat has 4 legs. Therefore, my cat is a dog. Okay? That's false in the guilt aspect because the association is wrong. This also is very similar to the equivocation, and it's similar to the kerosene and Red Bull one with the Family Guy ad. John is a con artist. John has black hair. Therefore, all people with black hair are con artists. Okay? This idea here is it doesn't match what's being said. Okay? That association doesn't match. So you have to make sure that it's not included, and we're not going down that path of association for the wrong reasons. Okay, just as a pre-warning, these 13 logical fallacies will have a rather large quiz on Wednesday that will only cover the 13 logical fallacies. We will do some more practice on Monday and more practice on Tuesday in preparation for your quiz on Wednesday. Okay? Have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you on Monday.